Hello there and welcome to Candid Cruises. Now today I am delighted to be joined by two veterans, two icons of the cruising industry. John Honeywell, aka Captain Greybeard, editor-at-large of World of Cruising, and Dave Monk, deputy editor of Metro newspaper and also recently crowned Best Cruise Blogger for Cruise International. The awards. Well done. Thank you for joining me, both of you.
It's a pleasure.
Now, I could ask you where it all started, your love of cruising, but I'm not actually going to do that. I might come back to that. I'm going to say, what was the last cruise you both went on?
Individually?
Yes.
The last cruise I went on was a week on board Crystal Esprit at the beginning of August, and we spent a week travelling from Dubrovnik to Venice, which on one of the larger ships you would do in a day, but we were on a much smaller ship. There were just 62 passengers, and we spent the whole week going in and out of the islands along the Dalmatian coast. Was it wonderful? It was wonderful.
I think I read a few of your posts actually, and mentioning.
Did I make you jealous?
You did, because I have to say the best meal I've ever had was on Crystal's Serenity in the Nobu restaurant, on land or at sea, and so I did feel waves of envy.
We had an amazing chef. He's called Adam Jenkins, and he was from Birmingham originally, and he works in a tiny show kitchen with a really small crew in the kitchen. And the plates he produced every night were just unbelievable. Yeah. It was superb.
It is extraordinary, isn't it, as well, with the confines that you've got at sea, how the food is superb almost across the board. Dave, your last cruise?
Last actual cruise was in Alaska with Holland America, and that was in June. But the thing that preceded it was part of a trip across Canada, which was fantastic to see Lake Louise and Banff and Jasper and go on the Rocky Mountaineer. So that was a fantastic trip. Last weekend I was in Venice with Norwegian Cruise Line to see a couple of their ships which are going to be updated. And that was lovely, but a very, very busy trip.
Yeah. You've both got years and years of experience. Okay. If you ever go on a cruise, you've both just been on cruises that are extraordinary and high-end. If you were to go on cruises that weren't so good, or there was something that really wasn't right, do you write about that? How honest can you be, or is it notable by its absence in your reviews?
We don't whitewash everything. If something's not right, then I will point it out. Sometimes you have to do it fairly delicately. Yeah. But yeah, when things go wrong, you say so.
What about if you're being hosted? Isn't that very difficult?
It can be difficult, but we find a way. As you say, we've been around the block a few times, and we've had experience of these things.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always best, isn't it, for the public to be as honest as you can.
I think the key thing is to say what group of people each ship is good for. Because by saying that, a big ship has got lots of entertainment, bells and whistles, lots of noise, lots of activity, maybe lots of children, I think readers themselves will work out, hang on, if I want a quiet trip, that's not going to be the one for me. Yeah. And quite often when I go on a small ship, I might say, obviously it lacks this, that and the other, but on the other hand, it has these benefits. Yes. The first time I went on Oasis, which was then the biggest ship at sea, I ended my article by saying, but whatever happened to just standing on deck and looking at the stars? That's the thing. I think you can give a balanced view, and the difference with John and I against some other writers is we have both been national newspaper journalists. And so as well as doing reviews, we also do news pieces about cruising. Yes. And of course, things that make the news tend to be bad. Yes. There are accidents and deaths and all the rest of it. So we do, I think we can say that we give a balanced view of the industry as a whole. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a very astute comment. Favourite
places you've been, favourite ships? I mean, I know we're not meant to sort of single any out, but is there a line where your heart leaps when you think, I'm going to write about that next?
When people that I meet who find out what I do for a living, which is travel on cruise ships all the time, they're invariably very envious, naturally. And the next question is, which is your favourite? And I always have to say, well, I don't really have a favourite, because it depends on lots of different circumstances, where you are, who you're with, what you're doing at the time. And that was always my stock answer until I went on one particular ship, and then every time somebody said to me, what's your favourite? I had to stop myself blurting out that this particular ship was my favourite, and I'm not going to tell you which one it is.
John, you spoil sport after that build-up.
No, it's still my secret.
Oh, OK.
Although if you read between the lines sometimes, you might be able to work it out.
Okie dokie. Dave, are you going to...
Well, I have to come clean. I always gave the same answer as John, and then once I was asked to write a piece by a cruise website about my favourite ship.
OK.
And while praising lots of other lines for different things, like I was saying just now, some are great for family, some are good for adventure, some are good for solo travel or whatever. My general conclusion in the end was Crystal Serenity, which was just fantastic.
Yeah.
But, you know...
We seem to be in agreement. I didn't say anything.
Watch this space, because there are new ships launching all the time.
Talking of which, how do you both feel about the way the cruising industry is going? I mean, it's just changed really over the last decade beyond all recognition. I know for me, and I'll stick my neck out here, I actually prefer smaller, more intimate ships than the huge, vast, as some would say, floating hotels, although they have their merits as well, especially for families. Where do you two both sort of stand on the smaller or the bigger side?
Well, everybody assumes that the next ship always has to be bigger, and we've had Harmony of the Seas, we've had, with P&O, we've had Britannia, and now the next P&O ship, which was announced a couple of weeks ago, is going to be half as big again, and there's going to be 5,200 passengers on. It's going to be the biggest thing P&O have ever done. But there's another group of cruise lines, the Vikings and the Regents and the Seabourns, that are building new ships that are much smaller, 600, 700, 1,000 passengers. Yep. So there is something at both ends of the market, I think.
Yep. And that's always important to maintain as well, isn't it? Yeah. You know, not bigger isn't always best. No. You know, where do you prefer a smaller, more intimate?
Personally, if it's my own trip, I think I'd go for the sort of medium size, small to medium size. Yeah. Viking Sea I was on, and I know John was on earlier this year, which was Vikings, lovely ocean ships, and also the Crystals of this world. I think generally for first-time cruisers, I think Celebrity is a good brand. Yeah. And we've sailed with them several times. But when you go on the huge ships, when John and I were on Harmony, and you see a production like Grease, you know, that is just Broadway standard. And obviously you can't get that on a smaller ship. So it depends, you know, it always depends what you want, who you're with, what sort of holiday you enjoy. Because some people would be bored to death on a small ship. Yeah. And other people would be lost on a big ship. So the key thing is getting the ship that's right for you. Then you'll have a good cruise. Yes. Normally, if someone has a bad cruise, it's because they've gone on the wrong ship.
Yeah. What do you say to people who really have no interest in cruising? And that's sort of, sometimes people are like that without ever having even tried it, or they think it's for a much older demographic, or just not for them. Do you try and change their minds?
Yeah. Well, I hope that some of the, you know, when I'm writing for the magazine or for in the Mirror or wherever, then I'm trying to sell cruising as a concept, and a particular cruise when I'm writing about one that I've been on. But you know, if you've never been on a cruise and you don't get it, then try it, because once you've had it, you'll never want to do anything else. Which is what happened to me. I'd never been on a cruise until I went on one, and it was almost a disaster, because we should have been sailing from Egypt all the way back to Dover, and the ship broke down and we ended up flying back from Malta. So it wasn't the most auspicious start.
Gosh.
But I was hooked. And,
Were you really? Even just from a short space of time?
Yeah, I mean, it was just from that 1 week on board instead of 2 weeks. And now I don't do anything else.
Yeah, yeah. And Dave, you might as well say, what was your first time?
My first time, a PR person, public relations person that had invited me on a previous trip to the States, then joined one of the major cruise lines and said, would you like to do a cruise with us? And it is like crack cocaine, basically. They say, well, you take 3 days, do a 3-day cruise. You can walk away from it afterwards, So we tried that, a quick trip around the Med, and then she said, well, how about 7 days around the Caribbean? So, and once we'd done that, then we were hooked. And the thing is, as a journalist, you once you're known within the cruise circles, you get invited to try out other lines, and you'll go to events, and there's a small circle, would you say, of cruise writers that John and I see frequently on all sorts of ships. So you kind of get involved in that. And for Metro, the paper that I work for, it's quite a niche subject because our target readership are quite young.
Yeah. But
just last weekend, when I was in Venice and with Norwegian Cruise Line, they were saying they're aiming to attract 30 and 40-year-olds on their ship. So the general age of cruising is coming down, and the cruise lines, or some of the cruise lines, are trying to put in those facilities to attract the younger audience.
Yes.
And as John says, I think the thing is, if people say they don't like it, my sister-in-law always said to me, I'll never go on a cruise ship. And then we eventually got her on one to Alaska a few years ago. And now she's the one who's going through the brochures saying, we should do this, we should do that, we must try another one. So it really is, once you try it, you're often hooked.
Fantastic, great. Stay with us, we're going to go to a break. Do stay with us because we've got more wise words coming up. Hello there, welcome back to Candid Cruises. Dave, can I just mention something you said earlier? You mentioned about cruises for single travellers. Do you think a cruise is, a first port of call for a single traveller? Do you think it's a good holiday, both of you?
Well, I naturally wouldn't think so. I would naturally think it's a great thing to take at least a partner, if not another couple, some friends, because then you've always got a group of people you can sit with, go out with, do excursions with. To me, it's quite a group activity. But when I was flying over to Venice last week for this Norwegian event, the woman next to me on the plane was actually a solo cruiser, and she was only 35. She'd been sailing going on cruises for 10 years.
Gosh.
Most recently as a solo traveller. And she said, it was great. It's a very safe environment to meet people.
Yes.
There's lots going on. You can be by yourself if you wish, but they organise lots of events. And more of the cruise lines recently have not only installed solo cabins, but they've produced an area where people can mix up quite informally, not under any pressure. So that they'll kind of see each other in this area and get talking. So if they make a friendship, they can then obviously go on excursions and things together. So I think the cruise lines are getting round, and also the pricing as well is beginning to encourage more solo travellers to go with them.
Yes, I'm glad to see that some single supplements are now being wiped out, which is absolutely right, as it should be. What are your thoughts, John? Well,
when Dave started off by saying that it was a group activity, I was about to weigh in with on the other hand, but he's just done it himself.
You can weigh in as well.
It's a safe environment for somebody travelling alone. You're able to meet and mingle with other single travellers, and the cruise lines will organise meetings for you to get together. If you're travelling alone but you want to sit next to somebody on the bus on an excursion,
Yes.
then you will be you can make friends and travel together, and then probably make friends that you will keep in touch with afterwards. And then the next time you go, well, you won't be going as a solo traveller because you'll be going with your newfound friend.
Yeah, no, it's true. I went on a Saga cruise last year, and I was...
You're not old enough.
I'm quite impressed that if you didn't want to go on an organised ship's excursion, but you didn't want to travel around a place completely alone, you could meet fellow travellers and actually just go out together, you know, or in a little group. And I thought it's fantastic, all those developments. What would you say would be a good cruise, or a kind of optimum itinerary for somebody who might be watching who's a first-time cruiser?
I very often suggest Norway for a first-time cruiser, because it's not too far, although I did travel once with somebody. We spent 2 days getting from Southampton to the first port of call in Norway, and they wanted to get off the ship because there'd been too much sea. So I did. Well, did you read the brochure? You did, anyway. It isn't too far to travel to get there. The scenery is just amazing. And if you go on a ship, on a cruise, you get to see the fjords and the cliffs from the sea, which is better than seeing them from the land, and you don't get stuck paying the outrageous prices for drinks and sandwiches and meals in Norway.
Brilliant point. My last cruise was to the fjords in Norway, and it's prohibitive. It can set you back just for a cup of coffee or an ice cream. But I also went kayaking down the fjords. Exhausting. I wouldn't recommend it. I like kayaking. I was absolutely shattered.
I took a helicopter trip. I recommend the helicopter trip over Geiranger. But yeah,
over Geiranger
cheap
Fjord.
kayaking for me.
Yeah. What about you, Dave?
Well,
what would you say?
I completely agree about Norway, but there are also 2 or 3 day trips you can take, either from Southampton and just pop across to Zeebrugge and go to Bruges, which is a lovely visit anyway, or fly out to somewhere like Barcelona, maybe spend a couple of days there, which is such a beautiful city, and then take a short med cruise, maybe fly back from another port. I think if people are concerned about feeling seasick or whatever, it's quite often good to avoid the Bay of Biscay and fly straight to the Med.
Yeah.
And you normally find that the waters there are quite smooth. Or of course there's the Caribbean. It's a wonderful place to go. But then you're committing yourself to quite a long flight and a long journey.
Yeah. What about luxury cruising? Because I know that sort of cruise ships are moving the barriers, they're you know, sort of upping the game all the time in terms of luxury. We've touched upon Crystal. There's of course Regent, you know, Holland America, Seabourn, Silver Seas.
The standard of luxury, even on the cruise lines that are not generally considered to be luxury, the standard of service is much better than you would get in a luxury hotel in many cases. So there are the tabloid newspapers, of which I write for one, but they tend to, every reference to a cruise ship refers to a luxury ship, and they're not all luxury. But
why do you think that is?
I mean, it just sounds good.
It's like sleeping villages, isn't it?
Massive heart attacks and all the rest of it, you know. There are certain things, you know, certain adjectives always go with certain words. So they're always luxury cruise liners, and they're not liners, but that's another story. I was saying earlier that the luxury lines are expanding and growing, and in percentage terms, faster than the mainstream lines. There are more ships being built in proportion for the small lines, the luxury lines, than there are for the big ones. But although the numbers of the Royal Caribbeans and the P&Os and the Princesses are greater, but the demand is there. And when something like Regent Seven Seas Explorer that was launched this summer has a grand suite that costs $10,000 per day. And I think I saw the headline on a proof of the feature I wrote in the World of Cruising for it, which says, "Who wants to be a billionaire?" You can rub shoulders with people who are almost billionaires, and you can sit in the same restaurant and then drink in the same bar, and you can tell them how much you earn or not as the fancy takes you.
Yes, Dave?
Yes, I think, you know, as you say, with some of the ultra luxury brands, it is almost like being on a private yacht.
Yeah.
But then, as John says, the companies like Norwegian, MSC, and others are now building sort of ships within ships. So
yes, of course.
There's a luxury or ultra luxury, as we now have to call it, because everything else is luxury, segment where for the chosen few who want to spend a bit more on a cruise to have that privacy and their own restaurant and their own swimming pool,
their own exclusivity.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that is being ramped up within the so-called lower brands as well.
Right. Okay.
The advantage of those for the customers who are prepared to pay for it is that they get their own private restaurant, private swimming pool, but they can go to the theatre and mingle with the riff-raff and watch Mamma Mia and Grease. Not the riff-raff. You know
or the Blue Man Group. I went and saw the Blue Man Group.
Sadly no more.
Yeah.
Sadly no more.
Well, they're not on the ship anymore.
Right. Well,
but they were my favourite show.
Yeah, they were extraordinary, weren't they? Final question. What's on both of your wish lists, Dave?
Oh, well, I've not yet had the pleasure of going on Regent Seven Seas, so that's on my wish list. Watch this space. But yes, I'd like to do South America, Antarctica, places that I'm sure John's been, but it'd be nice to go a little bit out of the normal.
Yeah, absolutely.
South America I have been fortunate enough to do, but Antarctica, New Zealand, if anybody's watching, are still on my bucket list.
I'm going to New Zealand on a cruise in February.
All right.
I would say you can join me, but you can't because I think my husband might mind. And I think your wife might as well. But
there might be other rooms on the ship.
Absolutely. Listen, thank you so much for joining me, John and Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. See you next time for Candid Cruises.